talk about a lot of times. In fact, Bill even said to me when he finished the book that he was really surprised at a lot of the things that I wrote, even though we were navigating it. He was not absent in the process, but clearly I was writing a lot of things on the page in the morning before work. And then I had a conversation with a friend at a hockey gathering, and
as one does.
Yeah. And she, we were whispering on the bleachers a little bit, and she said, what have you been up to? And I said, oh, sort of writing. And she said, what do you mean, sort of? And I said, oh, I'm learning I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm writing before work. And she said, you need to go to the Loft Literary Center. Do you not know about this place? And I said, no. And she said, start taking classes now. She's the social worker, and is one of the first friends I had, and included me in a lot of things. So it makes sense that it would be her to tell me about this program. So then I just decided, well, I don't think I'm going to write a book. I'm just going to learn to write some because I'm enjoying this. So then I took a class, and then I decided I think I should probably write a book because I'm loving it.
And tell us why you felt like this was an important story to share, beyond that you were enjoying the process of writing.
Well, a lot of what I was writing was about my struggle. And as I was practicing as a psychologist at the time, I had Emma, who was newly adopted from China, and then William was struggling. And so I would go into the office after these rough mornings at home, because our hours were that I was the morning parent. And many times I was just like, everybody just get in the car, come on, let's just do this. And trying to get everybody where they needed to be. And by the time I got to the office, I just felt that I would then be talking to other parents and helping them, and they were occasionally, once I started to get more of the support I needed, I felt like I could say what was happening without breaking down at work or something. And so I just noticed the relief on parents' faces when I started talking a little bit about, oh, well, my son has been having some of those difficulties, this is what's helped us. Or, this is the type of writing tutoring that's really helped my son. And all of those things, and people would say, wow, you're dealing with this too? So it just added a lot to my work life. Sharing helped me connect a lot.
One of the things that I think is great about the book, from my purview, is that it's as much about a parent's journey and a parent's struggle, also Will's, obviously, but can you talk a little bit about, and obviously you have professional expertise to probably, weave into all of that, but just how this can be very, very challenging for the entire family. And I find child raising to be complicated.
It's complicated.
Which is like kind of a nice way to put it sometimes. But it can be, like what a child's struggle becomes, it certainly takes over your life as a parent. Can you share a little bit about sort of what you witnessed both as a parent and as a professional?
I think that one of the things I've heard from people about this book is that it is more about the family than most books around this topic. I think the guilt that you experience when one child is over-functioning, that especially when that child is younger, and you're going, Will, get your shoes, and that little person, Emma wasn't even speaking very well. She had been in China, wasn't even speaking very well, was pretty quiet, and she would go retrieve his stuff. And I think in many ways, she then became the person who knew where everything was, and I think that's a cognitive strength of hers, but it was also a pressure for her, because somebody, we needed the finder person. So that's just one caveat of how complicated it can be, and yet William had these huge areas of strength that brought a lot of attention to him as well. And so we were helping him all the time. Andy was getting a lot of attention in his strengths, and then there was a lot of struggle. So there's that other child that is not getting the same, and when, not getting the same attention, it's just a fact.
Yeah. And so why are we all hearing so much more about ADHD than when we were growing up, when I was growing up? I mean, I wasn't aware of it at all. As a child, you certainly had kids in your class who seemed more hyperactive or had a harder time sort of sitting in their chair and following along. But has something changed in our culture where we are recognizing it and diagnosing it, or is it, like food allergies, something that is just more of an issue now than it was several decades ago?
It's both. It really, I just wrote a blog about this, and it is really both. I think that some of the diagnostics have changed in the DSM-5. Our diagnostic manual around mental health or disorders. I'm not really keen on the whole disorder lingo, but it does help figure out what your next steps are with a child. So that part, some of the age range and some of those things have changed. And there's a lot of research going in right now to why autism and ADHD are both on the rise. And there's things in our environment for sure that they're keying into.
Like what? Can you give us some examples?
Like the fertilizers that we use. Those have been linked to higher levels of autism and ADHD. Like the Feingold study, this guy that did a lot of research and came up with the idea that food dyes did impact behavior in kids. He was then put aside as someone who was faulty in his research, but there is a grouping of kids that have neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD and autism that are really affected by food dyes. And so my advice is always, why bring them into your life, even for your child that doesn't have ADHD? So we're all going to be places where we eat some of those things occasionally. I mean, I think being slightly flexible is okay about it. But I just really think that I just talk to parents about, don't buy the gummy worms. I buy them sometimes for me, and I do eat them sometimes, but don't buy them for your whole family if you're having to lock them up, for your child that has ADHD that wants them. So there's a lot of food sensitivities that we're learning about, and there's new genes that have been identified that are related to different strains of ADHD.
Yeah.
So, and I remember several kids in my class growing up, they couldn't read, so they made jokes throughout their reading, they misbehaved while they were reading. I think they also had ADHD looking back, and nobody talked about it.
Yeah. So, because your book is, there's a lot of information, it's also a memoir, so if I toggle a little between those ideas, how did you approach what you wanted to say and you wanted to share with, really mostly Bill and your son William's feelings about their, privacy? I wrote a memoir, so it's something that I dealt with also. How did you do it, especially with Will being a kid?
I probably could have done it a little better. I think I gave everybody the opportunity to read everything. And some people didn't read every detail. So I think maybe I don't know how I would have really fixed that. I think there's a few things that are like, did you really have to share that? But very few. One or two. And maybe that's going to happen when you write memoir. I don't know how to fully fix some of the things that came out, and it's not just about my family, but it's some things I shared that other people may not have known that were extended family.
Yeah.
They were like, I didn't know this. How did I not know? Why did Dad not tell me this? It's like, well, you didn't have a major postpartum incident. So,
right.
So there's some things that just happen that you assume someone else is going to know. But Will is one of those kids who really just said, just write this thing. Just do it, Mom. I mean, I had an editor who recommended that there was one part that I take out, and I agreed with her. It wasn't well, but I thought that's true, and then, so I had really good editing people as well, that I trusted their writing, and they were very good writers, and I trusted them as writing support people to say, I think this would bother my team.
I read something last week, I can't remember where, but I read something last week that says, you're not a successful writer until you've written something that makes your family hate you.
I've had a little of that. There's been a little bit. There was a conversation at Paula's that I didn't even talk to you about yesterday that was a little bit about that.
And so, what can you share with, the parents who have come here who, whether their child has a neurodevelopment issue that's going to get diagnosed, or they're just finding them, challenging. We all worry and, wonder what's normal, what's not normal. How does this reflect on my parenting? When should I relax? When should I be on? How do you, can you just, what's some practical advice for parents trying to do right by their kids in a time when we almost have too much information.
We do. I always say, there's a few things. If a parent comes to me and is pretty concerned about their child struggling to focus before kindergarten, I usually say, if it's causing a lot of behavioral issues at home, I help connect them with someone who's a child psychologist. But if it's more just, I'm just a little concerned, I can't get him or her to do these two tasks that seem very easy, I say, let's see what happens in kindergarten. Let's just see, because my son was very attracted to similar kinds of kids to himself, quick thinkers who were focused on what they were focused on and not necessarily other mundane things. And they did not end up, a lot of them, having the struggles that Will did. So I got for sure his closest friend, and no, he just shut it down in the classroom and just sat there. So I think the school setting gives a lot of information, but in Will's second year of school, his teacher did not identify reading as being a huge struggle, even though Will was in the lowest reading group and he had repeated kindergarten and was still first grade in the lowest reading group, so the oldest kid. I was concerned because our family history has dyslexia. And the teacher was like, you know what? Although there was a lot of writing his name on the board and all kinds of stuff going on, she didn't think we needed to get reading help. I completely thought he needed reading help. So trust your gut. If you think your child is lagging and it's concerning to you and you're looking at handwriting on the wall and you're not just seeing, wow, the letters are all reversed and other people seem straight, most of them, or we are struggling for way more than we should be at night, I think, with getting through tasks. Don't just wait. A lot of times I waited too long because in my book you will see that I reached out a lot, but I didn't get the support we needed as a family till later, and that's because of my work, because I'd read so much, but I needed someone to sit across from me to help me and to be my support. So involving people that you hear good things about, if you have people in your community that you feel like do a great job with kids, don't worry about the stigma. Get the support. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and there is much less of a stigma,
yeah.
I think, as it becomes more prevalent and, I was thinking about recently there, as probably many people here know and have read about, there was a big scandal about kids of wealthy families and their parents doing all sorts of things to help them get into colleges that perhaps they, wouldn't have gotten into otherwise. But part of what it revealed is this idea of getting extra time for tests, which is hardly on the scale of the cheating that the scandal was about, but it's part of that continuum. And ADHD definitely plays into that, because kids are getting diagnosed and getting more time for standardized tests as a result of that. Do you think that is there anything going on where it's being over-relied on this idea of ADHD? Are we over-diagnosing, and is it ultimately something that's going to hurt kids who are really struggling from it? What's your take on sort of how it feeds into the testing? Because it's a real thing. A lot of kids are getting those,
Well, right. I'm having a lot of that in my practice. A few things. One is the benefit of testing. You can really identify things like processing speed. So if your child is in the 99th verbal and the 14th for an aspect of processing speed that would impact testing, which is copying from one piece of paper to the next, that's a visual processing difference, that was Will, then the added time, if you've been using it throughout your education, and not just at the end saying, wait a minute, we need this in junior year of high school, we've not had any added support before, but you have to really look at the whole picture. And I think for my son, he had those supports all the way through. His school, William was the one saying, I don't think I need this. And his teachers at his school were saying, yeah, I think it'd be a great idea. So, and it was a very smart decision. But you're looking at the big picture, and I think there are kids that come to me who have ADHD whose processing is their processing speed is consistent with their other cognitive skills. Maybe it's working memory. So you're really looking at a lot of things. It's not as simple as because you have ADHD, you need added time necessarily. That's why I think the testing is so helpful. But a lot of kids with ADHD have anxiety, which can also impact testing. So again, it's an individual thing.
Yeah. And what about medication? Obviously, I would assume there's no it's a case-by-case sort of thing, but I know that it's something a lot of parents worry about, the idea of the developing brain and not wanting to, medicate as a first resort. How does medication help ADHD? When does it not? Can you address that at all?
So the part of dopamine and norepinephrine are the neurotransmitters that the medication tends to boost. And for about 70 to 80% of kids who need the medication, and we can, it's very, very helpful. But it has side effects. So you're really always looking at what is the benefit versus the side effect. For Will, a lot of times the benefit did not exceed the side effects. Currently, a very low dosage of medication was really helpful. So for writing a paper or certain things like that, I think some kids, what I try to do, it depends. If that child is really all over my office and one of the ones that's like fallen out of their chair 4 times because they're like rolling all over I talk pretty quickly. I don't feel that family. And they've been in counseling, and they've been working with the school, and then maybe we've gotten some accommodations. I don't want that child to wait a really long time if their schooling is already behind. Because so many kids with ADHD have learning disabilities, about 50 to 70%. So I'm looking out for that child by really seeing what is the tiniest dosage of medication that might make life so much easier. But, that is not, it's really looking at working with the psychologist, helping that kid gain insight, so many things. It's not, medication by itself is not the answer.
Right, it's medication plus the therapy or...
Yeah.
How has your situation with your children impacted you as a psychologist? Has it impacted your ability to care for other children, or is it completely sort of separate? Is your experience of benefit?
I learned so much from Will and from Emma, and from the kids I see. I have them do these tasks where they complete sentences, and a lot of open-ended stuff, and the stuff they tell me, I put in the report so that other people really hear their words about how hard it is for them in a typical school setting. And so a lot of times I'm really just using their voice to advocate. But my kids, I mean, I've learned so much about ADHD from Will. I would never have understood, I wouldn't have understood the sleeping problems, the eating issues, so many things that go along, and not every child does, but he just happened to be one of those hit the jackpot kind of. We just had a lot of the stuff, a lot of the sensory things, a lot of, right? And yet, if you see Will, he's just, you would never know. We've been dealing with so many of those things. So.
And what are, were there any early on sort of like great, I don't know, coping mechanisms or things that you would suggest that parents try if they feel like they're having a hard time calming their kids down, quieting them down? Were there any sort of great activities or?
Exercise. I mean, this is one of the things that comes up a lot, is that many of the kids that have ADHD that I notice are, hyper-focusing is a big thing, right? And so you're really able to get focused on like a video game or something. And parents will say, I can't get my child shifted off of this activity. And shifting is very hard for kids with ADHD.
The transition.
Right,
Yeah.
just shifting attention. So I just say, don't have video games during the school week at all. Why? Why have them? You're going to have a fight about it. So just don't have them, and instead have something where it's like, this is our routine. So that you have it part of your routine that you're going to, we're going to go and jump on the trampoline for this amount of time. Or we're going to go do Taekwondo on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that child, I don't want to go, I don't want to do it. If it's just part of the routine, eventually you'll just get less of that. And maybe if you get it every single time, choose something different.
Yeah.
But it has to be that you do something. And I think that in itself, just getting the movement in, is huge. And I think focusing on strengths, there's so many opportunities to be mad at a child that has ADHD. It's true, because so many of the things that you just want to get done are harder. And if you focus on strengths by working with somebody that can help you do that, by let's do a reward system instead of a take away. And I know those get really sterile, the reward systems, but they do work if you have somebody helping you shift. I'm thinking we did these things in the morning, like you'd earn $1 if you can do A, B, or C. Yes, I still remind it, but different ways to keep everybody on track, and have friends around you that are also not big advice givers. That doesn't help. But friends that can just let you vent, and my friendships became very clear around, my closest friends are the ones that really helped me through, and I'm not judging their kids either. Some of them are like incredible math people, and great,
It can be very isolating as a parent.
Yeah.
I mean, my kids, when they've been conflict, you can sort of retreat, you don't want to be, it can be
Yes.
very isolating, and we take on a lot as, parents, feeling like we're doing something wrong. It just can be very tough on parents, too. No matter what you're talking about, whether it's like something that's diagnosed or just having a teenager.
Yes, I mean, I remember sitting outside of the, I haven't really talked about it, but sitting at the principal's office, like sitting out there with Bill. I'm not sure why we were there that particular. I mean, we weren't there all the time, but I do remember feeling like, here we are, and hi everybody. And I'm sure it was one of this, he's just wandering around. We can't get Will to stay where he's supposed to be. But there is an embarrassment level about being judged. And then you get to a point where you get older and you don't care as much, and that's really nice. That's part of where I am now.
Yeah, you get older and you see how uniqueness in your child is actually a special attribute, which if you can channel it the right way.
Yes, that was a good thing, having a really big, I think people ask me a lot about Will's music and how did that happen, and at think it's great to be, I think one of the things about a lot of the gaming is that it gets in the way of those other experiences. So you don't have to find some specific area, but he had a whole lot of guidance around music, playing an instrument, and we didn't just say, if you want to practice, great, and if you don't, great. He had to practice. So.
Yeah. So why don't we give people an opportunity to ask some questions, which I'm sure they'll want to. So, everyone ask whatever you want. Try to make it general questions, not just, specific about your children, but I'm sure any parent is going through something that's somewhat different.
So it seems like every particular era has its psychological worry, right?
Yeah.
So like in the 50s, when there was such a pressure in society to conform and to adjust, that it was known as the neurotic decade, because the people who weren't conforming and adjusting were worried about this. Am I neurotic? It seems to me that ADHD is very fitting for the time we're living in now, because there's so much stimulation coming from every direction, and I wonder to what extent do you feel that it's not environmental, the environment we live in that sends signals to us from every conceivable direction, brings out these weaknesses maybe in children. Do you feel that that's an issue? And if it is, how do parents deal with that?
Is technology contributing to the problem? Do these things happen dovetailing, or is there a cause and effect with the technology and the attention issues?
I think like in an evolutionary sense, our brains are shifting around all of this, divided attention. So I think it's a very good question. I don't think that I hope the kids who are being diagnosed that are put on medication are not simply distracted by their environments. That is more of an environmental issue than to be managed. I'm distracted by my phone, and I have to go to a coffee shop in the corner and do a lot of things, and I've never had attention problems growing up. So I feel like I do a lot of times. So I hear what you're saying, that's why I feel like structuring the house for attention. Some kids, it's like creating an environment the best that we can. And I think when we try to be perfect parents, it's just a huge drag because nobody can do it. But if you try to just say, what is going to be conducive to focus around here? And how can and your kid some kids need background noise, some kids don't. I find that children that have ADHD that are doing their schoolwork in their room, it's almost always a fail. So in a setting where you have some eyes around, where there can be some guidance and support as needed, without the idea that if I finish this, then I can do my Netflix. That's the hard part, is there's a lot of rushing to get off to then do what you want to do. And then I think reading is a lot less of a priority. So I think that if a family learns about that setting, that creating a home that way really can calm things down. Yeah.
Other questions?
What can you share about the development of a child who has this and then becoming a teenager and an adult? Is it a lifelong?
He would be a great one on this.
May I answer this one?
Yeah, you should.
Can you say the question again?
So I want to know what you can share about ADHD as a child and then a teenager and then an adult.
Well, some things stay the same, some things change. I think you have to learn. It's like, I feel like if someone smokes cigarettes and they're trying to quit, then they learn different tricks to get themselves to quit. You learn different tricks to kind of calm yourself down. Like, I still have moments of weakness when I'm studying, where I now know where it's like, if I tell myself, okay, I'm gonna be completely unproductive for a half hour, and then get back to what I'm doing, knowing that I've set the time limit on a half hour, and then when that half hour's up, I can actually now shut it off. But then I used to, when I was younger, it would be like, oh, let's add another 15 minutes to that, another 15 minutes to that. 3 hours are gone. And so I feel like, yeah, you just learn how to put I think maturity just comes in, and that you can put certain brakes on that you just never really knew that you could, or that just happen when you get older. And yeah, and also just, when you're a kid, you're also trying to figure out what medication works, what doesn't. It's like, everything is just you don't even really know yourself, your own brain yet, how to control it. It's just kind of running crazy. So, but I think, yeah, you just, by trial and error, you eventually do, I mean, if you work at it, you'll learn some skills at how to take care of things. And that comes with, but I think that's just part of growing up.
And how old were you when you began to realize all this?
Honestly, probably like 16 when I started actually gaining skills. I feel like I was like very I was still like acting kind of behaving the same. When I was 16, I was just smarter. Could procrastinate better, maybe. But then, yeah, I think once I got into college, it was kind of, and later high school, when it suddenly was like, you have to do well on the ACT, and you have to do all these things that are going to impact your life. Once I kind of realized, like, I think once I gained a sense of responsibility, or just kind of was like, oh wow, I can't behave like this anymore. I'm going to just everyone's going to freak out.
Like it wasn't just about the
Yeah.
conversation.
You know what I mean?
It was when you sort of had a sense of like, these are things I want for myself.
Yes, I think so. That's what
Yeah.
it felt like.
Cool.
Could I just get you to kind of focus not focus, but to define for me, because there was really very little about this subject, is the issue, I'm sure it's very different across the group of people, everyone who has any kind of issue that we call ADHD, but is the issue in general an inability to remain focused on one set of activity, or suddenly jumping over here and over there, or what? I mean, I'd like to see a kind of picture of what are the kind of predominant issues that crop up.
And when you explain, like this is a neurological thing. This is
Right.
about things not connecting. Like the food dye exacerbates it, but it's not environmental stuff. It's actually is it? I
It's a
don't
more
know that.
sensitive brain. So there's a lot of parts of the brain that are affected. One of the main parts is the frontal lobe. But there's the cerebellum, because motor skills are often delayed with the fine motor. So there's a lot of different parts of the brain that are impacted, and it's structural and chemical, meaning with the neurotransmitters. And so to your question, it used to be, it's really Edward Hallwell, who's written a lot of books about ADHD. One that a lot of people have read is called Driven to Distraction. And he and others, like Russell Barkley and other big researchers in the area, talk about this isn't a diagnosis. Attention deficit disorder is really not a correct way. It's the diagnosis, but it isn't about inability to focus. It's much more about shifting. So, and focusing on areas of interest tends to be easier for someone with ADHD. They talk about hyper-focusing. So, even though Will was very interested in music, focusing on aspects of music, his teacher always had to allow him to play like a bare bones rock and roll when he was young, and foundational things to build the skills. But if you just kept him with something that wasn't as interesting, Ode to Joy or something, he wouldn't have been able to probably progress as well. So it's maintaining a level of interest. Having an area of interest is much more essential for a child with ADHD, because focusing on mundane things is very difficult. And again, Will, I don't have the diagnosis, but he would probably speak better about that. But it's, does that answer it at all? So it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, predominantly inattentive type, is one subgroup. where the inattention is the biggest challenge, but they have the H in there for hyperactivity because they realize that people that have the ADD, we used to call it ADD, fidget more than most still. Often it's the adult who's still kind of on the aisle at a movie theater, kind of just is like, I always need to kind of get out and move. It doesn't mean that that adult has ADD or the inattentive type if they're doing that. It really has to interfere significantly with functioning across multiple settings. So that's really the key here is it interfering with your life so much that it's really, like you can't meet your goals?
I have a question. What are your feelings about the theory that there's a connection between ADHD and sleep disordered breathing or not getting a restful night's sleep as a child, sleep apnea? The theory being that children that are not getting a restful night's sleep aren't able to go through that sleep cycle to rejuvenate, and then they display it, they manifest their sleepiness differently than adults, that they move around and they're trying to stay awake by moving around. And I mean, I'm a dentist and we've gone to a couple of continuing education courses, one in particular that says there's no such thing as ADHD, it's just kids aren't getting a restful night's sleep because of all the overstimulation. And may I also ask, did you feel that there was, with your son, was there any type of, was he snoring or getting up at night or not getting a restful night's sleep? What are your feelings on that, as that theory about the ADHD with the relating to the sleep disorder breathing?
I do think it's a lot of kids. I think it's important to check sleep big time. A lot of kids, if they're not sleeping at all, and that's been the main concern, and let's say that child was doing really well early on, and then suddenly this is a developmental diagnosis. You're going to see symptoms. I saw symptoms in Will when he was very, very young. Like, I would say even as a baby, I was carrying him around and walking him and walking him and walking him around because of the desire for his stimuli. Now, is a baby, if your child has colic, do they have ADHD? No, I mean, it's not that, but I lost my baby weight so fast because I believe he probably had ADHD and he loved to move him all the time, and he didn't sleep well from the very beginning. So you're really looking at, that's why it's so important for a child psychologist who has a specialization to really look closely. You know, sleep apnea can be identified, and then you really want to determine, get that treated, and are you still seeing the symptoms? But for someone to say that no child has ADHD is really concerning.
So is there a connection between sleep and ADHD?
Big time. Well, children that have autism and ADHD often have a lot of sleep problems and the busy mind. So you're usually going to see more stuff, like some lags academically, some other things, but they can easily be ruled out. So there's no reason not to have a sleep study for your child. I think that's a smart thing to do. If your child is exhibiting symptoms of ADHD before, we often say, have that done. Many kids have had that done before they come because parents have often exhausted so many things before they get to me.
Yes?
So I wanted to ask about, did you just notice the difference between, school, the academic situation, wanting your child to be on medication because then they were more, more of a comfortable student in the classroom as opposed to accommodations for the child, like giving them breaks, having them go out and take a walk if they were getting, nervous or an inability to focus, or giving them more time to calm them down. Are you seeing a better balance in that? Because it certainly has changed. I think there was a big push for a lot of medication, and that's maybe not really the way to learn skills and cope.
I think that the teacher-child fit is so giant. And when I see great teachers, I just tell them, your gift to the community is so huge, what you're doing. William's second grade teacher was amazing. He was not on medication that year. He played hockey, and she let him stand by his desk, and he ran a bunch of errands for her, and she adored him. And the ADHD was still really very evident, but it worked. She made it work. I'm not saying some kids that may not work, the first grade teacher, it was very punitive, and it was a really, really awful year, and it prompted a lot of shifting in me to be a much stronger advocate.
So, and I think, if I'm understanding, just to focus then, I think some of what Katherine has said is that medication should not be given in isolation or in absence of teaching those coping mechanisms.
Right.
So that it's not, kids aren't being medicated so that they don't have to develop, right?
Right.
It's sort of possibly giving them the tools to be able to, then better develop some of the coping mechanisms.
There's a guy named Jonathan Mooney who is, some of you may have heard of his books. He has one called Normal Sucks and one called The Short Bus. And he is dyslexic and didn't start reading until he was 12. He had a lot of intervention, but it just was very hard for him. And he has ADHD. I just saw him speak. And he's got some really great points about the educational system. And he described his desk as a torture chamber for him. He really couldn't take it. And he said to us, if you need to get up and walk and leave, I couldn't sit for 5 minutes for my discussions. So do what you need to do. So I think that we're learning more as a culture about, you can't just write kids' names on a board and shame them. You can't get away with that anymore. We're learning, like Miss Smith, who isn't Miss Smith.
I figured.
Of course she's not Miss Smith. But you can't do that anymore. And if you as parents, those things are happening to your kids, don't talk. I mean, again, your main thing is to have a good connection with that teacher and really to be not thinking what the teacher needs to do for you, but what you can do for the teacher too. What you can do, because there's one person, they're overloaded. So what can you do to make their life easier? Share stuff. I say, don't hold the diagnosis back. A lot of people are afraid to share the diagnosis even. So just be in partnership, but also have an expectation. Your child should not be punished around a neurological disorder that is impacting their inability to sit or focus. And that's just over, I think. Culturally, you can't tolerate it anymore. There's not many people like that, but
I feel like I'm seeing cultural shifts away from the culture of sitting to do your work. I mean, just in my place of work, everybody has a standing desk. I mean, your desk goes up and down, and I don't think I could survive without that movement.
yeah, me either.
And I know they're not doing, they're doing it for economical reasons, but not everybody has a desk anymore. You have a computer, and then there's like common areas, and you see like millennials walking around with their computers all the time, and they just sit on the couch, and they sit, they're always...
It's moving that way, but you're in a progressive life in many ways. And there's a lot of kids that are still seeing me that are having the struggles that Will did. Truly, I'm not trying to be negative, it's just true.
Okay, do you find that ADD or ADHD is more prevalent in boys than girls?
It is more.
And if so, do you think that single-sex schools for boys, where the modicum of behavior is geared towards boys who move around a lot, is a better environment for boys to be in school?
I think having teachers that are tolerant is a better environment. Teachers that are well educated. I don't know if it's about being with all boys. I think it's about how much you know about kids and what they need, and we have to have order in a classroom too. That one of Will's entire school conferences was about the route he was going to take to ride his bike to school, because they were so focused on riding his bike to school will be a huge benefit once he gets there. He was doing fine academically at that point. So, but you see, the focus isn't always so traditional. Some of it is about problem solving, about other things.
Why is it that we are seeing this more in boys? I mean, is it that they're being diagnosed because they're quicker to misbehave and have their problems identified, or is it more prevalent in boys for some reason?
It is more prevalent. It's like 3 to 1 boys to, and it is with, it's to my knowledge, I just was looking at that. It's been this way. I don't know why it's more prevalent in boys, but it is. The girls often are presenting with the inattentive type. It's just as important to catch. because it leads to the low self-esteem and feeling that you're stupid when you're not paying attention. So you're going to see those cognitive results in testing as well. You'll see the working memory differences. Rote memorization tends to be really hard for kids that have inattentive, both types, for the hyperactive and kids that are inattentive. If you read word lists to them, it's really tricky to retain that information, even if their intellect is really high. So there's a lot of things in testing that can help.
But then is it genetic? Is it on the line?
It's very genetic. It's, yes.
I
So
mean,
right.
it just does, I don't know if we've got to like, why is it more in boys?
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for that.
I mean, one theory that I kind of read about is that the males, and this goes back to when we were cavemen and hunter-gatherers, males tend to be bigger risk takers, more impulsive, because it's evolutionary, because they had to be the hunters and to go out there and just do things quickly without thinking. Whereas the women would more methodical, they stayed home and took care of the cave and what was going on at home. So I think some of it, no offense to all those working moms, but back in those days, kind of that's how it was. So I think some of it is just genetic and it's just ingrained in the male and female brain.
All right, let's take one more question, and then hopefully everybody will buy the book and have an opportunity for Katherine to sign it and speak to her. Yes.
Hi, I have a question, and for the grandparents, parents, educators in the room. What for social skills and William, or if you can talk from your professional expertise? I'm an educator, and I also have a son that has ADHD and attentive type, and so for me, it's been, a learning curve as a parent. Your book hits the nail on the head when you said that in your professional expertise, like you could help others, but you couldn't understand how to help yourself and William. So my question is, when social skills arise where they cannot recall the story and their perception is often skewed, what advice do you have for us in the room? I struggle with that with family members. They think he's lying all the time. And I said, no, you forget he doesn't pay attention to details, so there's details that are missing. And I don't know what advice you have for all of us in the room that are struggling with that piece, and if William can attest to what he recommends.
Grandparents have been, I did not know this, like the social media people that have been kind of targeting who's buying my book, a lot of grandparents. And so they're changing when they post my stuff based on when grandparents online. But it's been funny. So I had to have some very frank discussions with my mom about, she thought that Will was trying to get attention by wandering around or, whatever. And I would forward her emails, Will's singing in class. The teacher's like, it's disruptive. And I would try to prove to her the diagnosis a lot of times. And ultimately, she just, I think it's hard. Grandparents don't want your child to struggle. And they want to think maybe it's temporary. And I see that a lot in my practice. And it's generational too around a lot of this stuff. So I said, Mom, we're not debating if he has the diagnosis anymore. I can't debate it. She accepted that. I was that clear. But, and I just still have to have discussions with her and say, what I really need, instead of critiquing about his handwriting, the thank you note, please be happy that you received one. Just be happy, because when he was little, there's screaming and stuff that went into that. I'm trying not to scream, but it was very difficult. It was like a long process, the thank you note. So, she would get concerned and say, but his handwriting is just like, is Miss Margaret going to work on this? Like, this is crazy still. And I'm like, I had to just tell her, this really raises my anxiety, and I need you to just be doting.
I would have been like, grandson, everything.
Hey, Mom.
I know, one of my editors was like, what in the world with the thank you note? So I think you have to be frank and say where you are with that person. And in terms of the social piece, I really hear you when you talk about a lot of kids with ADD can't remember friends' names even. they'll say, well, who were you playing? I don't know. It doesn't mean that they're not friends with that child. It's a memory part of what you see. So you being an advocate is really important, and I think getting some of the material and asking them to read. Maybe this book would be helpful, or more, I can give you some ideas on books. I have a resource page on my website with a lot of great books. But asking them to take the time to read books, and not just saying, please, just offering them something and maybe highlighting parts and say, this would be so helpful for me if you would learn more about this along with us.
Oh, Mom. So
Yes,
I think something that you can do to help your kid with like the whole, because you mentioned that your family sometimes thinks that your kid's lying,
Yeah.
and he kind of is and kind of isn't, and I can explain why, because it's like when you can't remember things like that, if someone asks you like, do you know what I'm talking about, and you just learn eventually. I feel like as a kid you really want to please. So saying no to that, and then someone kind of gets this look on their face like, you really didn't hear anything I said. And then it's kind of like you just get sick of that. So you kind of are just like, yeah. I mean, my dad does, I still do that all the time. It's like a bad habit. It's like someone will say something to you and you're just saying, yeah. I should be saying no.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't hear a thing. But at the same time, it's like a learned response. And I think a way that it's like almost a defense mechanism thing. It's weird. But I think also getting your kid in, and memory is a super hard thing. Like, I can barely ever even remember what month it is. I have a watch now that says it, which is super nice. But anyway, get your kid into journaling, I think, is super important, because that really boosts. It's something I do now, where it's like if a day goes by, I'll write about what happened during the day, so I can actually look back later and be like, oh yeah, okay, I do know where I was, what I was doing, why. And it just really has helped me, and I think if I had gotten into that earlier, it would have been nice. So it's just.
Well, it's been so wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming. Will, thank you so much for contributing really immeasurably to the discussion. And you are what all parents would wish their children to become. So thank you, Katherine. We really appreciate it, and I hope you'll all like it.
Hey, this is such an honor for me to be interviewed. Really, it is just so cute. And thank you all.
And the book is for sale at the desk, and Katherine will stay a little bit and sign them for you if you would like. I also just want to pick up on one thing that you mentioned, which was Ned Hallowell's book, Driven to Distraction. I read that over 25 years ago, and it's still, I think, one of the best books out there. There are a lot of clinical books about ADD that tell you what it is and what kids look like, but he has ADD. And so he wrote that from his soul, and that really is true. I think it helps a lot of people who don't get it really connect with people who have that.
Yes, and he interviewed me for his podcast, Distraction, and he's interviewing Will at the end of the month. So if you go on his website, you'll hear, he's just been a great support. He's so many good books out.
Well, thanks
Well,
again.
thank you.